Sometimes you see some events coming out in African countries, African continents. It gives you high hopes, it raises your hopes so high. Other times, some of the events keeps you down. What will Paul Biya, a 92-year-old man who can barely walk, be or become the next president of Cameroon? Is it that there is no opposition leader or somebody who is competent enough to be the next president of Cameroon? With all Cameroonians has been true, you sometimes wonder, is this all right? Now, the Western powers that are always pushing against Burkina Faso, all these countries, Sahel countries, Sahel states, they will not see this type and say something about, they keep quiet because it's for the interest of one of the Western countries, France. Why is Paul Biya being the next president again and again? For the 8th time, Paul Biya is coming into power. How come he became the president again? It's very obvious that this man is unwanted in Cameroon again, but because of the powers that be, they can't be able to unseat him. Now, come to think of it, what will he be doing with power for over 42 years? So, if he becomes the next president of Cameroon, so he will be there for over 50 years now, He might die in the seat of power because he's about 92. Who knows? So, what are we looking at? What is the future of Africa? If these old leaders, this old head of states has refused to pass on the mantle of leadership to the younger generations, there are lots of young minds that can help Cameroon change its trajectory to something more better, to what we see in the world today, as in to come up to the world standards as against what Africa is depicted to be always. This Paul Biya's 8th term winning is showing that there is no hope for Cameroonians coming any soon. Help is not coming any soon to Cameroonians, because what will he be doing there? What does he even know by this? He should be retiring. Many Cameroonians are leaving, not because they don't own their homelands, but because their homeland has refused to embrace the change that Cameroonians want, or to embrace what Cameroonians has been wanting all this while. Imagine seeing one president who has never been very much available, the same old head of state, and not allowing other people to have some fresh air. So we see that happening in so many African countries, like you see that in Uganda, where Museveni, an 82-year-old man who has been in power for over 30-something years, has refused to relinquish power, even though there are so many strong oppositions who are capable enough, like Bobby Wine, an opposition in Uganda, to carry the country to the next level. At least he's a youth and he knows what is going on, around the world in this digital age. But this old head of states has held on power so long, transferring the powers and surrounding themselves with family members to be ministers, to be heads of commissions. See that in Nigeria. In fact, Nigeria's case is a sorry one. What can one do? We see a lot of these things happening in African continents, where old head of states, it's very obvious that your countrymen and women don't want you anymore, but you want to hold on to power just because of power, not for what you would do for the country. One common thing with all these heads of states, as we see, they rule with iron fist, fear. And they buy over all institutions, government institutions, just to favor them. They don't see power as political. They see it as, a dynasty they need to keep, a survival for them and their family. They need to be there perpetually, not relinquishing power to other younger people who have brighter minds to carry their nations out of poverty, corruption, instabilities that the African countries are passing through. So let's ask this question. What does it cost Africa, or African continents as a whole, or the young men and women of African countries, when these old heads, old minds has refused to relinquish power to younger generations, to brighter minds? What does it cost them? It costs a lot, because when you don't know how to do that job, and there are other people who can do that job, but because they're not in the corridors of power to carry out that, that role, a lot is being lost. A lot is going down the drain, because when you're at the head and you don't even know, you don't think properly, how will you pilot things? How will you make things work? It costs African countries a lot. It costs them fortunes, because some of these leaders are not active. Many of the young people are still trapped in the same old system, revolving the same old pattern over and over and again. They are so trapped in their progress to the point that they don't even know what else to do, because in some parts of Africa where these leaderships, these old leaders are holding power, you find out that when you oppose or speak against them, you are in for it. You can't blame the young people in African countries wanting out, wanting to leave their countries, because it's more like the old cycle, the same old head of states being cycled around. Even when they are recycled, they come out even worse than what it was. So let's see what happens as Cameroon announces their final presidential result, or final outcome of their presidential result. Hopefully something good might emerge for the opposition party, under Issa Bakare. But aside that, we know that this is rare, but if it turns out that Paul Biya becomes the next president again for the 8th time, or the 8th term, which means Cameroonians will have to deal with the same old states of things, the way things are handled for the next 7 years. Here I share about things, my thoughts on things I find interesting about Africa or African continents. So do not forget to subscribe. Drop your comment in the comment section. See you on the next one.